Hello, everyone. I have kind of a problem with these whiteboard videos so far. Not a huge issue, but for some reason, when I've been standing here making this new kind of content, which so far has gotten a really positive response from everybody, I've been struggling to slow down.
I am the one who knocks.
It's a really common problem you see with newer YouTubers in general. There's this panic of being in front of the camera, so you just go, 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 go. And some of my character that I play here every now and then does kind of cover that a bit. I think I'm not perfect about it yet, but something about this format makes me way worse at it than I've been in many years. So let's just all, before we get into this, take one deep breath, because there is no way a jittery word vomit video will appropriately capture the tone of Frieren Beyond Journey's End. So, all right, one deep breath.
A few moments later.
Chills. Let's talk about this. I don't think it's like a controversial thing to say every now and then that we need stories when life's not going the best the most.
Exactly. The story's pretty famous. Are you positive you've never heard it before?
No.
I don't know if this is true for everyone, but I feel like it's safe to say for a lot of people, whether it's because the world around you feels insane, you're having issues with family, just finances, stories provide escapism, and they can also provide meanings for us to read into. And if things aren't going great, at least personally for me, I find myself the most driven to just dive really deep into the media I consume, whether it be visual, written, animation, whatever. And recently, I think for a lot of people, the world seemed a bit crazy to me, and I've been stressed out, and I needed a story. Specifically, I was thinking in my head that hit like Legends and Lattes the first time I read that book. I've talked about it ad nauseum here on the channel, so I'm sure a lot of you already know what it is, but Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree is a fantasy book that doesn't really rely on having much conflict or action outside of like an initial opening cold open. It's just vibes. Like, it's a vibes fantasy book about a coffee shop and a little cute romance in a small town. And it's a huge, crazy success. And I've actually talked to Travis Baldree about this. I met him, super nice guy. And he's even fully willing to admit and says, like, he feels like he released Legends and Lattes at the right time for it to find the success that it did. Like, right, it was like peak COVID. So much stress in the air, such a crazy time for everybody.
For one, I think Legends and Lattes is very much a product of a specific time period that had popularity because of a specific time period. Everybody's been in COVID for years. They're exhausted. They don't want any red weddings at all. They just want to see somebody's human face. So the desire for a book that was comforting that also happened to intersect with a lot of other interests happening at the same time. And people are playing D&D on Discord. Critical Role is a big thing. Arcane comes out on Netflix. All of these things combine to have a perfect time where Legends and Lattes can succeed.
And so I think there was a ton of people who maybe before would have never even considered a non-grand journey, action-packed epic for their next fantasy read. But all of a sudden, coffee beans are this crazy, compelling element to one of the best-selling fantasy books of recent memory. So I was looking for that again, which I didn't know if I was ever going to find it again, because even the Legends and Lattes sequel, while it was still good and proved to me that I am very open to even more Legends and Lattes books, wasn't necessarily like exactly that same magic. I'm very happy to say I've had that magic happen again here, and it's because of you all. Big surprise. The goblins are awesome. Y'all know your stories.
I would take any job they let me drink on.
Very priestly, sir.
Because it was just in the last episode of Fantasy News, which is the best performing episode of Fantasy News in a long time. Thank you all very much for that. I mentioned there was this art display where people were able to get in a mimic box. And I thought that was so funny and so weird. And then offhandedly, I said, yeah, it's a part of this series, Frieren Beyond Journey's End. And they had to double the amount of mimic boxes because the line was getting too long. How cool is that? And the number of comments telling me, you need to watch Frieren immediately, right now, it almost became dangerous.
Just give me a moment. I need to think.
Huh?
It was a lot. So I figured, all right, I need to take a break after working really hard over the weekend on my next book, but I also just need something to be binging when I'm not on my feet moving. And so I got through 28 episodes in 48 hours. Which may be a record for me. I hear anime fans often talk about how they have a series that they just were able to get through like an obscene number of episodes in a very short amount of time. And I don't feel like 28 by any stretch of like the extreme metric is a lot. Like I heard of someone who did like One Piece in a month or something absolutely absurd like that. And I couldn't be happier with the one that I picked for that. Let's get into exactly why and what is Frieren Beyond Journey's End. And how does it manage to be such vibes? Well, the best way I can tell you that is actually just to point out that Frieren here is actually a titular show, because this is the name of our main character. A millennia-old elf who actually, continuing the titulartude, is at the end of her grand epic journey. That is such a dry marker. What the hell? As I was saying, the titude continues on right down here because we're at the end of the Frodo quest. We are at the end of the Dragon Reborn's journey. They've done it. We are even seeing, like in the final episode, the shot that would be the end of the prequel series where her and her companions are looking up at the stars and there's actually shooting stars going by.
I suppose I should be leaving.
Mapped out your next adventure?
For the next 100 years, give or take.
And they know they have to say goodbye, similar to when the Fellowship splits up and the hobbits go back to the Shire and everything. We see Frieren turns around to her companions who she's been with for years and goes, yeah, it's been wonderful, y'all, but I'm going to continue on. And being an immortal elf, she goes out into the world and does her things. And we get this montage where she's just having, you know, various mage activities.
Do rag activity. Do rag activity.
Gathering resources, studying magic, before she decides to go back and see her friends.
The last time I saw a shadow dragon must have been a few decades ago.
How unfortunate. I needed one for summoning. Come to think of it, I took a horn from the Demon King's castle. I asked Himmel to store it. The Era meteor shower should be circling around soon. I'll pick up the horn when I visit.
But she ends up coming back and,
Frieren?
Oh. Himmel, is that... You're near ancient.
Must you be so blunt?
You look terrible.
It, in fact, has been a long time. Her party that she went on this incredible journey with is old as shit now, except for the one also extended life individual in the group, a dwarf, who it's been so long, even he is like reached a new stage of his life, his existence, clearly. He's not as young as he was. In fact, she gets back just in time for one last adventure with her crew before Himmel, the pretty boy who you just saw so old now, passes. And then she stays for his funeral. Maybe the member of the party who, as we get further in the story, she had the most potential for a deeper connection with that went unrealized. And that is the source, the central conflict, initiating conflict, I'd say, for all that is to come for season 1 of Frieren. And it's magnificent. I am such a fan of the idea, the concept that floats around elves so often in fantasy, that they are somewhat divorced from time. Like, they don't see the passage of it the same way that us mortals do, and as a result, it can slip from them. There's all these classic elves in fantasy who end up kind of just fading into non-existence, disconnecting from the world around them because they either get too hurt by seeing the mortals they come to love continue to pass on, or they see themselves as separate and just get caught up in higher ideas that just lose all grip on the moment. That right there, and the avoidance of it, is what this show is about.
10 years with him wasn't nearly enough time to learn. I was aware that human lives are short, but this... Why didn't I try to better know and understand you?
And it's so important that the catalyst for this is grief, because we see Frieren in this episode realize that lost connection potential after this human passes on, and it breaks her heart. She begins mulling over her own inability to feel time pass. There is this recognized disconnect consciously from her, and it's brought narratively directly into the focus. But I don't want you to think that this is just going to be a straight through narrative. Instead, we have a much more, is the example I want to compare it to, is it Canterbury Tales? One like the classic storytelling method where there's a bunch of mini stories that go on within a story that lead to an important thing, but these aren't necessarily connected as much. As I'm saying it, I'm realizing this is just anime arcs. But you know what I mean? Like it's still very prevalent in older like fairy tales and stuff as well, where you'd have like one character bounce between these things before the grander narrative comes through. And I guess because of the classic fantasy setting, it just feels more like that to me. And quite interestingly, each one of these boxes has a very specific sub-theme of this time issue kicked off by grief. That's perfectly clear communication right there. I don't know what you're complaining about.
Before I go, let me get a good look. This will likely be the last time that I see you.
Why, are you unwell?
My years of drinking had to catch up with me at some point. Divine retribution.
So the consistent tone that undercuts all of this is calm, it's slow, and beautiful. It ties into the cozy fantasy genre that's epically popular right now. And of all the visuals I show you in this video, if there's one that's going to stick with you for you to fully understand the vibes going on here, it should be just the beauty of friends sitting together staring at the stars. We're kind of starting a story with a time jump, which is cool.
I should be on the road then too.
Off to collect more spells?
There's that, but I also wish to learn more about humankind.
Do you now?
Speaking of, I've a proposition for you. Though a mage is quite powerful, she could be doubly so with a warrior by her side.
I'm far too old to swing an axe these days.
So after she realizes she's essentially aged out this group of the best friends she's ever come to had, Frieren is a bit lost, and we see she begins contemplating how something that in the grand scheme of her life, a time frame, uncap you bastard, that might only be 1/100th of her total existence can still be the most important part. That means those connections are what made that time valuable. And so Frieren ends up building up her own party, not entirely willingly at first. She's kind of conned into it because she comes and hangs out with one of her former party members for a bit of time, whose name is Heer? I think I'm saying that right. And Heer is kind of, at least how I first watched this show, almost misdirected as a villain. Because at first he's like, oh, I want you to look into this magic book and find if there's anything in there useful about immortality.
Why do you want these spells deciphered in the first place? You told us that death doesn't worry you.
When I said I wasn't afraid to die, I may have been more concerned with my perceived courage than the truth of my words.
Mwahaha! The one concept you know if someone mentions there's like a 95% chance they're gonna turn out to be the bad guy. Except that is not what ends up happening. And instead, this was actually a ploy to get Frieren to pick up Frieren. Now you're wondering, who right here is Frieren? A powerful young mage, human, not elven, who is going to become Frieren's trainee.
How much could she have studied at such a young age?
Once I'm able to blast a hole in that rock, I'll be a proper mage.
Huh. His idea is a decent one. That's a... There weren't any spells for bringing back the dead or granting immortality. Did you know that?
How's Fern? Is she growing strong?
She has room to improve in some areas, but it wouldn't be incorrect to call her a proper mage.
Excellent. So she made it in time. It'll be hard for you to say she'll get in your way, now won't it?
Oh, you conniving little liar.
Her mage in training. Yeah. And Frieren, you just won the goddamn lottery. Because I have most certainly not emphasized enough in this video yet how much Frieren is an absolute goddamn badass.
It will never fracture. Zinza, I need you to tell me just who that elf is. Not even if the world were turned upside down.
Let's talk this through!
And that is for a very interesting reason. For Frieren's conflicts, they almost rely on the Superman problem. If you don't know what that is, I will explain. You always know Superman is not going to die forever, right? He might die. I mean, famously, he's probably done it like 6,000 times in the comics, but it's never going to be permanent. He's never truly going to lose unless it's just some like tiny offshoot event thing. There's not really a whole lot of tension for that reason for the reader to really believe this is ever going to matter. And part of that is due to the fact that Superman is just unbelievably powerful. Like, to the point where he was initially conceived in the comics, he would just like think of a power and do it. The narrative very quickly makes you understand and reemphasizes and drills home this is not much of a threat except for dry goddamn markers. Death is not much of a threat to Frieren. And spoiler alert, for a show that's confirmed for season 2 called Frieren, she doesn't die. I know there's some people who are going to accuse me of spoiling something by saying that. Okay, disagree. Do you think Spider-Man's going to be in the next issue of Spider-Man? I don't fucking know, guys. And this is actually well justified in the narrative because she is old as hell. She's killed loads of really powerful bad guys. And it's a core part of her characteristic traits to become more powerful. She obsessively studies new spells, more magics, going around the entire continent, doing odd jobs for people just in the off chance that they might have some magical artifact hidden somewhere in the village they might be able to give it to her as repayment.
This is a spell for finding lost accessories. I was intending to give it to you as a reward for all your assistance with my carriage and horse.
And without even knowing that, Frieren has just scored that as her teacher. Essentially, it's like being in Middle-earth and not understanding how badass it is to have Gandalf be your tutor. It's like, oh, he seems like he knows what he's doing. Oh, wait, he's a fucking angel. And this, fortunately, is one of the parts of storytelling that should be obvious, right? We see the connection between how Frieren feeling grief would be more susceptible to taking on a new apprentice like Friend, especially when one of the last lines at the funeral for her friend who died, whose name I just haven't said yet, and I'm going to say now, Himmel. That's why I kept thinking someone's name was Hamilton. There's Heer and Himmel, and my brain combined. I kept thinking someone's name was Hamilton.
I know that Alexander Hamilton is here and he would rather not have this debate. I'll remind you that he is not Secretary of State.
But this is one of the last things she says in regards to losing someone she loves.
Why didn't I try to better know and understand you?
And you see her actively learn from this lesson of having someone she could have had this deeper connection with pass. And quickly, as time begins to continue to skid by throughout the show, it's really rapid. You see she takes an active effort to actually understand and know the people around her better. This immediately kind of endears you to Frieren, whose personality comes off a bit distant, always a whole lot more. I think instilling a search for connection in a protagonist universally amongst most people is understood as one of the most guaranteed ways to get your audience to feel for that person more. We all feel that isolation, that loneliness at times. And if you've been unfortunate enough like myself to have someone very close to you love pass too early, you kind of never lose that desire to have known and understood that person more, to have seen how their life would have continued to grow beyond where they unfortunately were cut short. That is something that will stick in your head for eternity and really has the potential to change who you are fundamentally. And that change is Frieren's arc throughout this first season. But I don't want you to think that Superman problem is limited to just physical power, because a lot of this show is about establishing that power does not just come from raw talent or potential. And instead, like in the real world, it's funny to see in this super fantastical setting, a more practical approach to power be had, and that is that it comes from discipline and knowledge. Yes, people are more innately powerful with magic in this world, but the people we see win out, the people we see who are actually to be respected and considered wise in this story are the ones who practice great discipline and possess extraordinary knowledge. And believe it or not, in the real world, outside of privilege and money, which are, obviously huge factors in power, of course, but to day-to-day life for most people, discipline and knowledge situationally are the two greatest sources of power that I at least believe in.
Your spell was simply too powerful. After you were sealed away, mages across the land studied and analyzed Zoltrak until they had a complete understanding of it. Your great weapon is now ordinary offensive magic.
'Cause I studied you, moron!
But we'll get more into power later, but that is a continued theme throughout the entire season. It's been a whole lot of praise and a whole lot of story setup. I'm going to talk about some of the early criticisms I did have for the season, and there's going to be a lot more in the second half of the season. But just starting off, there was a couple, the first one's not going to be a criticism. This is just something two things you should be absolutely aware of. Beyond just the vibes, which will be the first point, I want to reemphasize one last time. This is a show where there's going to be stretches where it's just like music, birds, fields, magic spell that's pretty not relevant to the plot, but woohoo! This is about vibes. But two, we also have monologues. Prevalent in the medium of anime and manga quite a bit, I would say. This takes it to, at least in my limited experience so far, to a bit of an extreme. It's almost at a Mike Flanagan level of a monologue issue. I don't find it to be an issue, though. I love monologues, even for just voice actresses over animation. I think monologuing for an actor provides such an interesting opportunity to see them take their character to new places. But I also understand it can be tedious for some. And so if you are just one of these people who, if someone is talking more than just a few sentences, starts going, get to the point, shut the up, oh my god, it could bug you. The humor's not going to be for everybody. I'm going to throw that in there as a third point and just get it out of the way. Anime and manga, coming from a culture that is not the West, often doesn't have its humor translate perfectly. There's actually a fun anecdote Kayla tells me about her time living in Korea, where she went to see Deadpool in theaters, and essentially no one was laughing in the theater because so much of it was like cultural references or based in very like Western internet humor. And so like it just doesn't translate. And unless you are a major weeb and willing to get super into anime and manga and the references that are happening over there, some of that energy is just not gonna work for you necessarily. And if you have tried anime and manga before and it hasn't been your thing, just know it's far less of a degree than many other animes and mangas out there. In fact, I would actually say the editing humor was pretty great throughout. There were several harsh cuts for like, the classic comedy setup of like, no way this is happening, then it's happening. That's a joke we've all seen a gajillion times, and it's done effectively enough here to actually pull an audible laugh out of me twice.
Well, I was exceptional in every way.
It's super normal as you're approaching the later years in your life to be thinking about how to prevent hair loss and stimulate hair growth. As I'm just a couple of months away from my 30s, I want to be taking the best care of my hair that I possibly can. And thankfully, Keeps is here to help us all. They've helped over 1 million men. There might not even be that many men left on the planet by the time you're watching this ad spot. That's an incredible amount of men, with most people seeing a difference in just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, resulting in over 4,500 5-star reviews. They provide FDA approved treatment options, as well as a 2-in-1 gel that combines 2 into 1. Look, it saves you from having to go to the doctor's office and is going to be shipped to you in discreet packaging. Not that it needs to. There's no shame in wanting to take good care of your hair. So just know that you're not alone and you're not out of options. And go to keeps.com/Daniel Green. That's KEEPS.com/Daniel Green for a special offer. But getting into just a few more positives before we start talking more about how the story progresses, I actually want to say the editing as a whole, the art direction as well, as like a subcategory of that, phenomenal. There are so many times where the shot will cut to just imagery that's reflective to a character's conversation that's happening, but adapting what I've been told time and time again reading online is incredibly faithful to its source material. And from what I'm seeing, elevating the art by adding more energy to it, more color, more, just that oomph that anime over manga can provide. I'm not saying one medium is better than the other. I'm just saying, like, if you have moving pictures, you can certainly put more energy in it than a still image, which takes me to the score. The music? Holy God. I don't know who did the music for this. I don't know composers for animes very well or what have you, but I will know there are just times where it feels like I'm just wonderfully sitting in a Shire-like moment, just having this type music, just so nice, peaceful. Then we're going to cut to some Highlands, and it's that unbelievably epic orchestral, just fantasy theme, obviously taking a note from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Ring. And then in battles, we have dragons popping up and these drums kicking in. Just doesn't miss. Beginning to end, the music, top notch. Might even be in my top 3 elements of the show. I can't play like any of it here, unfortunately, on YouTube. I've been getting dinged so much for showing manga panels in old videos recently. I'm not risking it, but just know, bangers. Always appreciate any fantasy that manages to make me think of how Earthsea treats fantasy. And that, if I had to say, like, philosophically, if there was one series that paralleled how the elements that are fantastical are incorporated into the story and talked about, it is without a doubt Ursula K. Le Guin's masterpiece, Earthsea. So if you like that kind of fantasy, hell yeah. But where do we go after we get The Apprentice? And for those of you who like me to just get super on deep into a story, we're going to do that from this point onward. If you're very sensitive to spoilers, you might want to go ahead and head on out. Though I will say, I don't necessarily think this is a story that can be spoiled. It's very much so journey before destination. I'm actually going to talk quite a bit about how a lot of the larger plot points are kind of obvious, but it's everything around them that's so fantastic. But anyway, I just want to get that in there to be totally fair. And I hope you have a beautiful one either way. Okay, so the first big fun story is the start. Before we get into some side stuff that leads into the second big fun story, which revolves around demons. Fun fact about me, I love dragons in stories, and I love demons in stories. They are creepy and scary, and Frieren, it treats them well. So we'll get into that and why I love that soon. And then finally we get into the Mage Trial, which I have a lot more criticisms of. Be patient.
Hold on to your butts.
But cleaning up just the start that leads into this little side bit first, what is this transition? Well, you can't really have a fellowship with just 2 people. That's more of a fellow partnership, and that doesn't flow well. So they need to pick up another main major party member who is going to be Stark.
This is Stark, wait. I'm not done,
Stark is their warrior. Obviously, if you're going to have 2 mages, you need someone to absorb a lot of damage to protect you while you're casting spells. That is like the quintessential fantasy thing, and so that is where they get their Stark, who looks a whole lot like Randall Thor. Fun fact. Even has bandages around his arms a whole bunch, and there's a whole thing with Rand having to bandage his hands, so... But just because he's not a mage, don't think that he's not immensely powerful. We start off with him killing a dragon, and he's like, oh, I think, help me do it. And they're like, no, you did it. Past tense, that thing's dead.
Hey! Shoot it already! I did exactly what you told me to!
It's already dead.
Huh?
So, like, yeah, he's really strong in his own right and apparently has, like, an insane amount of potential, too. Now, the reason they meet Stark is he is actually the former apprentice of the dwarf from Frieren's previous party.
I feel terrible. I'm forever sorry for what I did. I was afraid. I was afraid of the boy, Frieren. I couldn't believe his power. My apprentice will become a great warrior.
So we're kind of tying into that theme of the past affecting her, for her kind of taking on this new generation that in both instances with Frieren and Stark are coming from people that were in her previous party. So we're doing the generational theme. But being an immortal, she's like, I still look like I'm 20, mother. But of course, every fellowship needs to be tested. And this is what takes us to the demons, because our party is heading north together. Why are they heading north? Because souls and wanting to reunite with Himmel. I'll let you watch the show to figure that out. That's a really nice, beautiful thing. But why are they fighting demons? Well, they get to one of the most northern places, and it's realm, a kingdom, an area, stretch of land, yard, where there has been a war between an existing demon family and an existing, like, fortress city. And a peace envoy from the demons have actually been brought in to the city to possibly end the war. And immediately, Frieren is like, no, absolutely not. Indubitably, that is not something I'm going to allow to happen. Why? Because she is a demon racist. She sees a demon in the public market and immediately draws her staff and tries to kill it. On sight. That is such an intense level of hatred. And she's actually arrested for this. She's arrested by the ruler of this area because he's like, this is a diplomatic peace envoy and you just tried to kill it. And she's like, dude, it's a demon. And it turns out she gets a 2-year prison sentence, which, you know, not great. Personally, though, if I was ruling a realm and someone tried to kill a peace envoy, like, obviously the guy's in the wrong. They're demons.
I've got a theory that it's a demon, a dancing demon.
But, more than 2 years. I mean, if someone tried to kill a peace envoy, I mean, that's life sentence, right? Like, that's not, you're just not hurting one individual. You're like damaging potential relations. But that's like throw the book at him.
I'd better call Saul.
I'm just saying, for a place that's spent its livelihood fighting demons, light sentencing. Now, I know what you're thinking. This might actually be one of the most predictable, obvious things ever, right? Frieren figures out that the demons are actually like kind of good people. They aren't as bad as we all thought. The fighting can come to an end. Not at all. She was absolutely right. They are demons! Are you out of your mind?
That guy out there, he's a demon.
Because we see the demons are planning to just take down a protective barrier that the city has, bring in their armies, and bathe it in blood. Like, they're just 100% trying to set this up. And
I'll ask him to lower the town's defensive barrier as a show of good faith. Then Lady Aura's forces will raise this meddlesome town and feast.
yeah, it's a little stupid. It's a little stupid that anyone would take a demon peace envoy and be like, I trust that. Desperate times. That's a good enough excuse for me. But the demons, having seen Frieren, are like, oh, she's going to try and kill us. She knows what's up. She saw right through us. She knows what we're really like to our core. We got to kill her. So they send someone to kill her. Kills a guard outside of her cell. Fails to kill her. She, remember, Superman, is basically like, you're trying to kill... Really? And just brutalizes a demon.
Let's talk this through!
This episode, by the way, is titled Frieren Slayer. It's like and it's a Buffy episode.
Buffy, it's entirely possible that they both arrived here by chance simultaneously.
But the ruler is told, of course, that one of his guards has been, double X-eyed, no longer with us. And the demons who are still left after the one they sent to try and kill Frieren is killed are like, wow, looks like that mage broke out and killed one of your guards. We'll help you look for her if you want. And the king, to his credit, is like, she willingly was arrested, even though she's a powerful mage who could have just not let that happen. Where's that guy who came with you?
Let's talk this through!
And I swear to God, the demon's like, oh, he's in the restroom. The king's like, no.
He'll be back soon. He went to use the privy.
Lord Lugnier, I'll ask you one last time. Where is your other companion?
My. That idiot, Drat.
And so then, yeah, the demons take over the castle, spring the trap, and it's up to our heroes, Frieren, Frieren, and Stark, to take them all out. And it turns into this big trial, prove yourself thing. It's wonderful. But there is one demon on the outside who is leading this army that's about to bathe the city in blood. It turns out it's got one of the coolest magic things I've come across in a long time.
The scales of obedience. They're why we haven't been able to defeat Aura over the years. Her magic allows her to control a person's will. We believe Aura places her soul and the soul of her target on the scales, then weighs them against each other. Whoever has greater mana gains control of the other.
So Fern and Stark take on 2 demons, and Frieren leaves the city and goes and takes on like the super mega demon. And this super mega demon has this really awesome magic setup where she has some scales, and she is able to take your mana with the spell and weigh it against hers. And she's got a redonkulous amount. And so if hers turns out to be more than yours and the scale goes in the wrong direction, you have to become subservient to her. Oh no. Frieren goes out there, starts fighting her entire army of just so many little dudes and taking them all out. And okay, that's bad, right? Because she's expending all of her mana, and then the spell is cast, and all of a sudden, oh no, she don't have that much mana. So the scale goes in the bad direction, which I guess would actually be, I did this wrong. Well, no, I'll just recover. That's the demon's mana. It's bigger. This is Frieren's. Except, and here's a bit of a criticism, but kind of not. You're probably looking at this and you're going, I know exactly what's going to happen here. She's hiding how powerful she actually is, and she has exponentially more mana. Yes. And that's basically told from us in this part of the story through flashbacks, where we see her and her master talking about actually hiding their mana to hide from threats how powerful they actually are. And this is something that Frieren essentially does all the time. She is never not smothering her own mana so that people don't see how powerful she really is. But the reason it still works is it actually uses an excuse to talk about the philosophy behind demons more and how they're essentially just predators. And this is undercut and emphasized with a story we get that explains why Frieren really Frieren. These names and dyslexia. God. Anyway.
Despite their performance of civilization, demons haven't changed a bit since beasthood. Might makes right. Mana is everything to their kind, much like status and wealth are to ours. It's dignity itself. Just as demons deceive mankind with their words, you must deceive them with your mana.
We get, wow, I drew a face that looks like it's screaming. Done. But we get a story that explains her hatred, where a village had a demon child kill another child on like the outskirts of the village, because apparently it just like came across them. And people within the village told the hero party that Frieren used to be a part of, there's like, don't kill this demon child. We'll try and raise it to be a good person.
It hurts. Make it stop. Please, Mommy.
Step away. I'll handle this.
Kill her, and we'd be no better than them. Surely this scared little girl can eat what we do in order to survive.
Are you crazy? It took our daughter. I'll never hold her again.
Fast forward like a day, and the demon child has killed an entire another family except for its child, and then tries to give that child to the mother of the baby it ate, and is like, did I do good?
Every day since I came here, I've felt your desire to kill me, but I just wanted to live in harmony. I figured out a way to make things right. Here, take this child as a replacement.
Brother,
And at the end of this, there's this scene where Himmel, the hero in her crew, who like originally founded it, he's the founder of her original crew, he's like, why do you say manipulative stuff like mommy? And the demon's like,
that word stops humans. It keeps them from murdering us. Isn't that magical?
Chills. That's how you set up a good monster race. I love that. They learn our and this is emphasized, they learn our language because they're predators who know they need to manipulate us.
Demons use words to trick humans. You can't trust a thing they say.
It would have been so easy to have this be a dumb storyline where it's like, the demons are good. But instead, the show is like, they are so much worse than you thought when this started.
That girl is the daughter of the village chief.
Yes, but he isn't alive anymore.
But yes, it turns out that Frieren was hiding a bunch of her mana, does end up tipping the scale in the right direction, and then she has the coldest moment, maybe, of any fantasy character I've read this year.
Ara, unalive yourself.
This can't be. No. How could I ever?
And I've read some dark books this year. I read Grace of Kings this year, which has a whole lot of cold-ass moments in it. But let's just play a clip.
Ara, unalive yourself.
Yeah, because she won, she got the balance of the cycle in the other way and is like, unalive yourself. That is so dark. I love her. Why do I love her so much? So yes, as you can see, a lot of violence. There is violence. Surprising amount of gore as well within the violence going on, and some dark themes. But do not let that distract you from the fact that this is, and I gotta reemphasize, 85% vibes. And at this point in the story, though, there's a second little undercurrent that's building specifically within the relationship between Frieren and Frieren. This undercurrent of we're watching her grow up. And remember, time is like skidding by between all of this. So I believe by the end of this arc, she's been with her for 4 years. Frieren consistently refers to like 30 years as a blink, but for this apprentice, who was still like a young teen when she was picked up, is suddenly turned into like a later teen. This isn't a point of conflict, but observations are made, and it's used to emphasize the growth that's happening within Frieren, where she is acknowledging the fact that she's put in the effort to get to know Frieren better. There's a real sense of sisterhood. I don't know, that's not necessarily the right vibe. It's not mother-daughter, auntie to niece, that there's something very special that forms about the relationship between these two. And importantly, as you probably noticed with how the king behaved before, like calling out the demon, and continually how conflict are actually handled between in the party here, none of it is based on stupid. All of it is based on reasonable conflict. But conflicts do happen here. Not as much between Frieren and Frieren, but very often between Frieren and Stark. But he's also a young boy who we're seeing grow, obviously close to Frieren. There's kind of a budding romance there. It's cute. And this is where the show, I was afraid, was going to be its weakest, but I'm happy to say is its strongest. And unfortunately, that's one of my complaints about the final arc we're about to get to. But in general, the interplay between these three is so charming. And there's so many lessons learned by everyone from others, wise and old to young, or from the wisdom of youth to the old. It begins to feel familial, not in the creepy way. And I think this is, in hindsight, my favorite part of the entire show. The dynamic between these three, to the point that when a fourth person is introduced a bit later on, I didn't like them. You know that feeling when you have a friend group and someone else comes in and immediately, despite one person really liking them and wanting, like, excited for them to be a part of the group, you're just like, no. I had that for the entire time, and for that reason, I'm going to spend barely any time on him, because he does just leave at a point. His name's Cian. He's the cleric, the priest, the monk who's here for a bit. He's also a degenerate. And I think the only reason I won't double down on saying I hated him, I think he was a good character. I just didn't vibe with him in the group. He is a trope that I enjoy. A drinking degenerate priest is a wonderful character to have in most stories. And this is a good version of it, but this is a triumvirate. Get your quadumvirate ass out of here.
Well, Frieren, you won. I'm going to become an adventurer.
A few moments later.
I've decided to go after Gorilla. You all take care.
But this takes us talking about the final chunk of the story I want to get into here, the Mage Trial. But unfortunately, the Mage Trial is my least favorite of the three as an arc as a whole, and this is for several reasons, but first let's set up what the Mage Trial is. Now, you're probably thinking, didn't you say Frieren's like a 1,000-year-old mage who's like Superman? Why does she need to go be in Mage Trials? Shouldn't she be at the top? I 100% agree with you. This whole premise just did not work for me a whole lot.
According to the Continental Magic Association, a person becomes a proper mage once they have achieved at least a 5th class ranking. Sounds moderately challenging.
Attention, please. The first-class mage exam will begin momentarily.
But apparently, there's a new system of mage orders around. So there's like it keeps changing, and they use this to emphasize how old she is again, where she's like, yeah, there's always like a new order of mages coming around every 50 years. And they're like, yeah, 50 years is a long time. And she's like, no, it's not. And I kind of actually agree with her on that. No, it's not. 50, I'm 30-ish. So... But this new order is like, hey, for anyone to be able to go beyond this certain point, which they need to go to that soul place I told you about, you need to be a rank of the highest order. You need to be a first-class mage. And so she's like, all right, I guess I got to go be a first-class mage. She's been recognized as like a hero of the age for doing what she did with her last party repeatedly. I would assume grandfathered in.
Do you know who I am?
They justify it more so with a conflict with a character, how do I spell that? Named Suri. And This is the master, if I got this right, of Frieren's master. So the master.
It feels as if the march of time has become a sprint. The apprentice I brought up on a whim has already found an apprentice of her own.
If it's peace that we're truly after, we'll need a mage like her to clear the way.
Are you saying a mage like me can't?
I'm saying the Demon King will never be the trophy of one who seeks battle.
And she's not that big a fan of Frieren. I remember her name's on the other side of the board, so pointing back to it. Actually, I think her name's down there, so I think I should point it. There we go. Not a fan. Because reasons. She respects her, but no friends. But as a part of the Mage Trial, there are 3 trials to be had. And this takes me to the next real big issue. That was such a Trump hand gesture. I don't know what that was. Ugh. But this brings me to the next real huge issue for this. You have to then introduce a bunch of people, all these people to compete in these trials. And all these characters they introduce, I don't give a f*** about them. I do not care about them so at all. Like, the writers tried pretty darn hard to make me be like, these people, even in the finale, it like relies on their emotional beats. Every time it was happening, I felt more the last time I took a poo.
People have a tendency to go away.
Of course, get filtered out as the trial goes on until we just have a few at the end. And these are supposed to be the few you care about. Even them. I'd rather go back to the priest cleric. 100%. That being said, though, everything aside from these people still worked pretty well. They just took up an unfortunate amount of the mage arc for me. And if I'm being forgiving, it's probably going to be something that on hindsight I like more as I get to know these characters more as the story goes on. I'm fairly safe to say the reason so much time was spent on these people was because they're going to be relevant for whatever comes next in the story. Because I think almost all of them want to continue on past the soul barrier thing. That's why they're doing it, at least a good few of them. And so they'll be relevant once we're beyond that barrier. I'm such a good writing communicator. Let's get into detail here. I just realized I'm not wearing my backup mic. I've remembered to hold this the whole time, though, so I should be good. So what are the 3 mage trials? We have the first one, the second one, and the third one. The first one, it's actually kind of a neat trial. I like it. Catch a bird with magic, whatever you want. Should be easy, right? Frieren's like Superman. Just go boop. Except this bird can break the sound barrier. It's a bird that can just...
There are 2 conditions you must fulfill to pass this initial test. The first of which is by sunset tomorrow, your cage must contain a Stilla. The second requirement is that all party members are present at that time.
What for? Stilla are incredible little creatures. At top speed, they move faster than sound itself. Trying to restrain one like that is pointless.
And so it is very hard. And then the secondary element is that everyone in your party must live, because they get teamed up with like random people for you to pass to the next one. So you have to make sure everyone in your group survives. And why would I say survives? Well, because if you capture the bird, nothing says people can't just take it from you. And so it gets violent. Fun.
Laufin, you've been hiding nearby, haven't you?
I will kill Denkin.
Do not listen to her, Laufin. She doesn't intend to kill me. Stay where you are. It's a trap.
You leave me no choice. Please know this doesn't bring me any joy. There you are.
Knew she wouldn't kill me. If you had any experience, you would have trusted in that.
The second trial is by far the biggest chunk of the story, and this is a dungeon crawl arc. They wanted to do a dungeon crawl, so they need to get through this tomb and unexplored dungeon, and they end up facing reincarnations or reflections, however you want to call it, illusions that are very good of each contestant that's made it this far. So it becomes like overcoming yourself, which is handled surprisingly well. And while I didn't care much for the individual people here, having that set up for the conflict was really engaging, and I haven't talked about this nearly enough, was a wonderful catalyst for the story to use the magic system in super fun ways.
Find out.
In fact, the magic system usage is, yes, classic and kind of like D&D-esque, but in terms of really broadening like how all these different spells and everything can be brought in fun, engaging ways for the action, never did not excel in that.
A double negative.
But the hilarious part of this is, guess whose reflection is the final boss?
There's only one thing I know for sure. If this weren't a trial, I would have shattered my bottle and retreated a long time ago.
Who is it?
Well, if you have Superman in your world, that's the final boss. And it's interesting how she is kind of one of the last people to like get to the final barrier to where like all the finalists need to get to win. And everyone's just sitting outside of the room with her reflection going like, we're not going to take you on. Like, are you kidding me? You're Frieren, which underlines and emphasizes this whole kind of silliness of her being here. It feels wildly unfair to everybody else involved that, like, Michael Jordan is having to try out.
It became personal with me.
Really? But she goes in to face herself, but because the reflection of herself, which is essentially perfect, Frieren comes in to help her. We have a fantastic battle. And I know you're thinking, oh, so her apprentice is going to provide the opening to give her the moment to take down her... Yep.
It's still standing, but that wound is fatal. I should finish. But my... how unlike you. You're wide open.
And as I've said before, obvious is okay. As long as you're still doing interesting stuff, it's fine for your audience to be able to go, that's going to happen. It's a part of many of our favorite stories. All that matters is when you make the happen, it is still engaging. And if you're paying attention to what's actually happening scene to scene here, very often Frieren is using these challenges that she does feel overqualified for to teach her pupil. This is even happening back in the demon conflict in the arc before, where she is setting up Frieren and Stark to handle huge tasks on their own because, one, she believes in them, and two, they're learning opportunities. And this is a rough world, and so she's kind of just putting them out there. Even in this final conflict with a reflection of herself, this is a very dangerous situation for Frieren to be in. Oh no, I am wearing the mic.
Nailed it.
This is a very dangerous situation for Frieren to be in, but she believes in her. She takes her on in. And as we have the audience has watched Frieren kind of grow up, it comes together extremely well to have these moments where you feel like an odd, profound pride. And it's built and woven in so that while the story may be obvious, its emotional impact in the moments of execution are not. And to emphasize that, I actually want to rewind to maybe my favorite episode and definitely the best kind of side tangent episode in terms of the majority of it not being relevant to the major arcs and instead just being a moment for our characters to interact with each other and learn. And it highlights the relationship Stark and Frieren have with Frieren because she takes them to a town where Himmel, the person whose soul she's trying to get to this place to see, actually, as a part of his legend, took a sword. And what we find out is, one, it's very based off Arthurian legend. It's like the Chosen One sword thing. So, seen that before. As I've said, obvious. But what's happening around it is not, because this is used as an opportunity to explore Stark's past. And we find out that he is from, not only did he have that brutal dwarf as his teacher, which there's a whole thing about the dwarf like hitting him at one point. Watch the show if you want to find out about that. But Stark is actually from like a pretty warrior culture family, and his older brother was constantly pointed at as like the, he's great, you suck.
Can't you be more like Stoltz? Not only is he unharmed, he doesn't have a speck of dirt or a drop of blood on him.
But his brother was wonderful towards him and did not like that his father did this.
Stark,
Sorry.
you have impressive focus. One day you'll be stronger. Let me show you how to fix your stance.
And Stark is having this big issue where he believed in Himmel's legend, his story. And so seeing that he wasn't this mythic person who did draw the sword, it kind of clashes with what he thought. But the show does something great with that.
Probably because people wanted Himmel to be some mythic warrior. It wouldn't do for him to fail inside the cave. When a new generation comes of age, they romanticize the heroes of the past. The truth of who a person was falls away, and they become an idea.
One, it re-emphasized the points of power I talked about before. The reason Himmel was great wasn't because he was able to get some sword from some stone, but he didn't let that stop him. He did fail, but he was disciplined, and he knew better, and he moved on and continued to be the guy who took down the big bad that happened in the story before the show even started. And Stark also, through these reflective times, we see how much he sees his brother as a true hero. And this is portrayed in, one, how Frieren is telling the story, the true story of Himmel versus what the icon he's become is, and also editing choices, score, so much to emotionally underscore what is going on with this character. And when Stark was first introduced, I was so afraid he was going to be a dumb, dorky, comic relief character, which he can be at times, but fortunately it's not egregious enough to ruin his presence in most scenes. And what we see is the maturity brought in where he's growing into a man, and so we watch him kind of let go of that image, but also understandably let it go for the false icon, but keep it for his brother, which... chills. I got chills. It was one of those moments where it was just like, oh. But showing how all of this is tied back into the larger arc of Frieren, we even see parallels of his own grief towards his brother wrapped up and packaged in a way where she is then able to give him advice because of what she's learned as this journey has gone on. And maybe she would not have been able to give as sage advice, pun intended, if she hadn't been through that. And that's actually part of the conscious scene to scene, but also broader scope writing I'm trying to master right now with my own endeavors into being an author, because so many people spend a lot of time developing their story only thinking about the broadest scope of conflict, not realizing that conflict, one, just like in an individual smaller scene, can be an incredible excuse to set up characters and, using a small beat conflict between them or something that's not going to even be outside the scene to help develop, the differences between them, but reincorporating conflict, lessons learned from a character to then represent in another character's internal conflict. That is some of the most satisfying storytelling there really can be. I love seeing a character I emotionally am connected to grow and then subtly reincorporate that to help me invest emotionally into another character while helping them grow. It's that kind of pattern recognition that our brain just latches onto. One of the reasons I also wanted to talk about Stark one last time, during the Mage arc, he is essentially dropped as a character, which from a writing standpoint, I understand, if a character's not going to be relevant, get him on out of there. But it also does kind of come across like a DM from a D&D game, just kind of being like, I wrote this side story for these characters. You want to go pick up the takeout? It's just very much so, he's gone. In fact, Frieren and Stark both have numerous kind of side conflicts and developments that I find really refreshing with how they're handled for them in the story. Frieren, for example, has this whole bit where she's become this very powerful mage in just a few years training under Frieren, obviously because she is an incredibly powerful person, but also due to her just being very dedicated and disciplined. But she also is kind of realizing she's living her life for other people, and that's kind of directly addressed as her kind of being a side character, right? She's the Matt to the Rand. She's the Adolin to a Kaladin. While she's had all this success, she doesn't feel extraordinary because there's not a lot of passion in what she does. And other mages even make observations about her that are kind of like, you're great, but there's no pizzazz to your style with magic. It's just all really well thought through with a ton of connective tissue between each of these pillars I'm able to get to. Fast forwarding. Blah! What's the final test? It comes down to a yes-no. And I feel like this could be slightly divisive because reincorporating the Master Ciri character from before, she basically just, tying my earlier section in, vibes it. She brings in the remaining candidate, vibes whether or not they've earned that rank, and decides. It's that simple. And I really like the end result of who gets a yes and a no. I won't spoil it here.
We just don't have the time, to do it.
But this is maybe not my favorite concept, but I think its execution within the story was as best as it could be. But we get to the point where the yes-nos have been decided, and for reasons I will not get into or spoiler, yes, our party can continue their journey onward. No, the show does not end with them getting there. There is another season to come, and instead, what the final episodes focus on kind of encapsulate the strengths and weaknesses of the show as a whole. And I'll say the weaknesses of the last couple episodes where they're kind of in the falling action, it's all being wrapped up as they're getting ready to move on. Mostly the negatives just fixate on the new characters. There's a lot of like, goodbye, I met you, you're in the trial, congrats. And I'm sure for a lot of people out there, it will grip them. It didn't for me. The good part is that's largely balanced out, though, with nearly every beat with our party reuniting and continuing on as they're getting ready to set forth into the next season. We see that Stark has been being the hero that he wanted to be. They run into so many people, and we hear from so many people who have benefited from Stark just existing in this city, waiting while they're at their mage trial, due to him just being an amazing person, due to him being a real-life, everyday, God's damn hero. And from Frieren, as this wraps all up, we get these moments of dialogue and these observations through happening in all forms of the artistry of animation, coming to some kind of feeling conclusion with these questions that have been asked throughout the show so far. The eras of one's life, how such a small time compared to the larger scheme of things can still be the most important beats of your life. Even if it's just a few years and you live for a millennia, those few years can define you and set you down a whole new trajectory. Appreciate the good times, connect with those around you, understand them, because that is the point of life. And it's, kind of overtly, directly stated in the text that, like, yes, she was able to conquer the big bad in her last party because of the friends she had. We're going to get those overt messages. But what's nice is very much so each of those bigger, more obvious thematic elements can be broken down and applied to each major character in how you see their own growth, dealing with similar topics, whether it's Stark having to, get over his betrayal by his master, which we touched on, the failures of his father, the greatness that truly was his brother, or Friend dealing with the fact that she's down this path without a whole lot of agency, and she's growing up. Like, she's not the little girl that started this season. It's well thought through storytelling. It has flaws. There's a few down bits. There's a little bit of the Wheel of Time slog, I'd say, in this season, but it's comparatively as much. It's just a few books in the 14 books of Wheel of Time, and it's just a few episodes in the 28 of Frieren. And as someone who's entered a new era of their life recently. I've moved. I might be moving again before too long as Kayla and I are settling down and starting to discuss things like starting a family. This story managed to do that special thing that stories do, where it struck that chord. That chord that only those few stories in your life have hit. You can maybe acknowledge that those stories have flaws. Maybe they're not perfect, but there was just something magical about them. Some element that for you hit an 11. And I'm happy to say I found that in Frieren. And for me, it's going to be an 8.5 out of 10. I am definitely going to be throwing this on when I'm having bad anxiety days. It's going to be one of those shows that's entered that playlist, and it manages to be so comfy and so cozy while having one of the baddest motherfuckers. Thank you for sticking around for this rant rave for Frieren. And let me know what you thought of Frieren if you have checked it out in the comments down below. Let me know if you'd like to see this done for any show, book, anime, manga, live action, not new, old. It's a fun video style and one that I really enjoy. And if you want to continue to support me here on the channel, I just released a show that I am basically hosting here on the channel from my good buddy Jackson. He has this amazing series called Between Two Perns where he is interviewing authors in a satirical manner. It's so funny. He is so good at it, and I wanted to help platform him because I think it's just genuinely hilarious. So if you want to see his Andy Weir interview, here's a clip.
And I was wondering if you drank any breast milk on the clock during that time, or if that's something that they only reserve for modern managers at Blizzard.
It's the last video posted here on the channel. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.